Hello everyone, I'm Ofir Duan, and I'm a student of one of the greatest teachers and directors of the Chekhov technique. And I'm very excited to ask him a few questions today. I'm talking about David Zinder. Goes by the name Non-Stop Zinder?
I did, yes.
Okay. Let's start with a few basic questions for the people who don't know you. Okay. So we said your name, and you can answer the age question, or you don't have to. Country and current job and position.
Okay, I am 78 years old. Currently, I'm a pensioner. I taught at Tel Aviv University Theater Arts Department for 28 years, and I retired about 15 years ago. I live in Tel Aviv. I was born in Jerusalem. I am a Jerusalemite in my soul, but I live in Tel Aviv. I've been living here since 1980, a long time, 40 years.
And what, when you're describing your current job, you said you're a pensioner, and you're not. You're doing a lot of things.
I never actually retired. I've been teaching all over the world, giving workshops all over the world. I have been directing all over the world, in Singapore, Taiwan, India. I spent a lot of time in India working at the National School of Drama. I directed there. I directed for about 10 years. I was connected with theaters in Romania. And I am a founding member of MICHA, Chekhov Association. I was there when it was established.
MICHA is the international big.
The Chekhov Association. It's the first international organization of Chekhov studies. And I'm also a member, not a founding member, but I'm a member of Chekhov Europe, which is another organization which was founded by the first generation students of the original teachers of MICHA. Most of them, thank God, are still alive. And wherever I'm asked, I was supposed to go to Japan in March, but that didn't work out. I was supposed to go to Russia also in March, and that didn't work out. Corona had a say about that. Yeah. And hopefully I'll get back. I've never really stopped working. In the past, I've sort of cut down on my traveling right now, but in the past, I traveled for one reason or another, workshop or production, about 6 times a year.
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah.
Intense.
Yeah, indeed.
So let's dive in and tell me about your first memory of the art world that made an impact on you, like a theater performance or a movie or some kind
I have a wonderful story. When I was a child, I lived for 7 years in the United States, from the age of 5 to the age of 12. And in 1951, we moved from Washington to New York. And one day we had a very unusual, eccentric neighbor in our apartment building. One Saturday, I think it was, or Sunday, he walked into my parents' apartment, and he pointed at me and he said, I'm taking him to the Museum of Modern Art. So my parents said, okay. I was about 10. We went to the Museum of Modern Art, and all I remember was that about every 10 minutes, we came back to the same place. This was Van Gogh's Cypresses. And he kept saying, look at that. Just look at that. It's amazing. Look at the painters. Look at the dynamics of the picture. And he kept on, and I think we kept coming back to that picture about 5 or 6 or 7 times. And for me, that was my introduction to art history. I know every centimeter of that picture to this day.
Did you came back to it afterwards?
Oh yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it many times. Yeah, but that was an extraordinary experience.
That's great, and it's your neighbor, not your parents even.
No, no.
And when and where did you learn theater?
I started out. Well, my mother told me that when I was 6, I told her I want to be a movie actor. But that sort of went away for a while. And then when I was about to finish the army, I was 21, and I had to decide what I was going to do. And after thinking about it for a long time, and I had been in what we call the theater club, like an after-hours theater club that's in high school, throughout high school, acting. Mm-hmm. And I also, during my high school years, I performed. I created my own version of mime. But at the end of the army, I had to decide what I was going to do. And after thinking about it for a long time, I said, I want to study acting. And my parents persuaded me to study acting in a university rather than in a theater school. So I did. I went to Tel Aviv University. This was 1962, the end of 1962. And this was a theater arts department that still exists, and it was founded by Peter Fry, who became my mentor and a very, very close friend for many, many years. And I went there, but very soon I realized that was not going to be enough, because Peter Fry was the only thing that was there that was really worth it in terms of acting. This was the 4th year. The department hardly had any teachers. I was enjoying the philosophy and literature classes and history classes much more than the theater classes, so I decided I have to make a change. So I applied for a number of universities in the States and in England, and I was accepted at Manchester University in England. So I went to Manchester and I finished BA there, and came back to Israel and started working as an actor. This was 1966.
So your main knowledge of acting is not from Israel?
No, but there's an interesting story which I will get to about Peter Fry. But we did, when I came to England in Manchester, they told us immediately this is not an acting school, but we did a lot of performances, and every performance was a learning experience. So that's what I learned. I never really learned any technique. Mm-hmm. There was nobody who taught something specific like the Chekhov technique or Stanislavski or Meisner or anything else in England. We just, I don't know, they just directed us. We acted.
Yeah.
But I did.
We're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
The importance of a technique.
Okay.
And what was your first part, your first job as an actor?
As a professional actor, when I came back in 1966, I went into a production very briefly with a small theater called Dvid, but we soon parted ways. And then my first professional production was a production of Anna Frank, not the well-known play, a different one, written by Meyer Levin and directed by Peter Fry. And I played the doctor, Dr. Dussel. And Yitzhak Chizkiah played Otto Frank. And when he left to go to the Camry, I took over the part of Otto Frank. So that was my first professional part.
And did you like it? It was an interesting part?
I loved it. Yeah.
It
was a very, very beautiful. It was a very beautiful production.
And what is the most remarkable part that you love the most?
When I was doing my PhD in Berkeley, my very good friend, he was then my teacher, my mentor and good friend, William Oliver, directed a production of Peer Gynt. And I knew he was going to do it, and I told him that I wanted to play Peer. And then when we came back at the end of the summer, we started rehearsals. He said, "No, you're going to play the Troll King and 7 other parts." Now, the Troll King, it's a fairly short scene, about 20 minutes. And then he comes on again as the old king. But it was the most enjoyable part that I ever played, then or afterwards. It was 20 minutes of pure grotesque.
Wow.
At the top of my voice. It was just wonderful.
Sounds great. And when was the first time that you came across the Chekhov technique, and what did you think about it at first?
Well, the first time I heard the name was when I was at Tel Aviv University. Peter Fry used to teach on Wednesday night, once a week. And I don't remember if he said that he was going to do this or what the connection was, but he introduced us to the psychological gesture. He told us what it was and how it works, and I got it immediately. And I was up on my feet and I was already doing a gesture, okay? At that time, I had just seen a number of times. I had seen Olivier's Richard III, and that's what I wanted to do, Richard III. Now, I know now that the gesture that I did was not a psychological gesture. Not quite, but I remember what it was. I piled up some chairs, and the reason it's not right is because I played the part. I made myself a hunchback, and I limped, and I had a club fist like this, but I dragged myself towards this pile of chairs, lifted my fist, and banged it down on the top chair. And immediately I said to Peter, wait, that's not right. And I went to get 4 more chairs, and I made a higher pile of chairs, and I did the same thing, trying to get up there, which is close to a psychological gesture. Not quite. But I remember it distinctly to this day, and I just remember that the minute he described it, I got it. And then I think it was the end of that same semester, he said he wanted to give us a present. And so in the studio, he asked us to all hold hands and sing a song. So we sang Yonatan Akatan, the little children's song. And then he put us through a long improvisation on molding, flowing, flying, radiating. And then he asked us, he didn't give us any instruction, he just said molding, flowing, flying, radiating. And then he asked us to join our hands together again and sing the song. My memory of that second time we sang the song was that we sang. It was extraordinary. It was so spiritual. It was unbelievable. And that was it for many years afterwards. But that was right at the beginning of my studies in my first year at Tel Aviv University. And then it took me 30 years to get back to Chekhov.
Okay, we'll get to that, I think.
Okay.
And who is the most influential teacher or teachers that taught you the technique? It can be more than one, but
well, the first time I developed over many years my own technique, which is in my book. It's called ImageWork. It was a collection of many different things from many different influences. And eventually I had what I thought, and I believe, is a kind of training, which I put together in the book, ImageWork. And in 1993, I think it was, I gave a workshop in America at the Association for Theater and Higher Education. At the end of the workshop, these 2 ladies came up to me and said, have you ever heard, one older woman and one younger woman, I said, have you ever heard of Michael Chekhov? And I said, I have, but why are you asking? And I really, really honestly didn't know. I said, why are you asking? And Mala Powers, the older woman, said, that's what you're doing. And standing next to her was Lisa Dalton with a big smile, saying, yes, 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 that's what you're doing. So I said, I don't understand. You have to explain it to me. And they said, okay, come to our workshop tomorrow and you'll understand. So I went to their workshop the next day. It was like all the light bulbs lit up. I'd been moving in my own way, creating a parallel technique, which was the Chekhov technique. And that was the beginning. The year after that, I went to my first conference. And as far as that's concerned, the teachers, listen, all of them. It's Joanna Merlin and Leonard and everybody, almost everybody was there, and they were all there. Ted and I don't remember if Fern was there, but Ted was there, and Graham Dixon, and they were all my teachers. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the most influential teachers, as far as the technique is concerned, was Joanna and Leonard. I think I learned from them more, possibly, than anybody else. But listen, they're all my teachers.
Yeah, of course.
I'm a perennial student.
And what can you say about Joanna's teaching?
It's just so clear and so committed.
Joanna is, we have to say, she's the only student, direct student of Chekhov that's still alive.
Yeah, she studied with Chekhov in Hollywood when she was a teenager, and she founded, together with others, the Michael Chekhov Association. She's been the president for forever, since it was established in 1999. And it's the clarity of her teaching, which is amazing. And Leonard is the same thing. He's so clear and so committed and so clearly connected to the professional work that he does. It's just a pleasure to watch him teach.
And you taught together for the first time last year.
Last year we taught together for the first time. Yeah.
That was an amazing workshop here in Israel, and I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And can you remember an influential sentence that you heard from one of your teachers that sticks? It really sticks and did something.
Honestly, I can't. I saw, we had, you gave us the questions beforehand, and I was racking my brains trying to find something really. But I'll tell you something else. I recently I was working in the theater, the Romanian National Theater the Hungarian National Theater in Cluj, where I did a production of the very famous Jewish play, the Dvid. It was recently aired, and I wrote to the lead actress just to congratulate her again for an amazing job. And she wrote back. She says in the introduction, there's an introduction in Hungarian, so I asked some of my Hungarian friends to translate it. And she said that what she learned from me was imagination, attention, precision. Now, I can't think of a better definition of the actor's craft. Imagination, attention, precision. Now, there's a saying in the Talmud, the commentary on the Bible, that I have learned from all who have taught me. And in that sense, she was a teacher, because she put together this is what she got from the work to this day. She says this is what she does. Imagination, attention, precision.
I saw this production now on live on Facebook. It's astonishing. I mean, I never saw one of your works. I never saw, and when I saw it, I didn't know exactly what to expect. It was just amazing work.
Well, it was a collaboration, because I worked with a brilliant designer, Miriam Goretsky, who's my collaborator on many productions. So that amazing set is her idea. And anyway, we won't get into that.
Yeah. Okay.
But as far as that, I was looking for, you're looking for a question, for a sentence. I can't think of one, but I did remember in that context, I remembered what this young woman, Imola Kesdi, said to him.
Mm-hmm. But I can maybe remind you not of a sentence, but maybe a gesture of one of your teachers that everyone in the workshops, when you do it, afterwards they go home and they do it. Do you know what I mean?
Peter Fry had this wonderful gesture when he was talking about something clear and pure, and basically it was clarity. He would do like this. Like this. Yeah. You know, it's almost like the Hindu Om Ni Padme. Right? But it's a beautiful gesture. Yeah.
And why, in your opinion, it is important to teach and spread the Chekhov technique?
When we talk about the Chekhov technique, there's always, especially with people who have never done it, there's always a comparison with the Stanislavski or the method, the most popular technique all over the Western world. Also in the East. In Taiwan, they study Stanislavski. In Japan, in Singapore, and there's a wonderful distinction that we draw between Stanislavski, or the method mainly, and Chekhov, and that's why it's so important, because of the emphasis on the imagination. And the distinction is that in the method technique, what you do is you go to the world of the imagination, you grab your character, and you bring it screaming and yelling into you. And you use whatever you have, which, as Chekhov calls it, your tiny experiential resources. That you don't have that many traumatic events in a lifetime that you can draw on, or really powerful events. So that's the method. You go up there, you grab the character, bring him to you. Chekhov, you do the exact opposite. You take yourself and you go to the world of the imagination. And the reason it's important is because whereas your own biography is limited, tiny experiential resources, your imagination is unlimited, and it grows constantly. Every time you read a book, every time you see a movie, you go out in the street, you see a dog. These are all images that get stuck in your mind, and they become material for you to work with. So the best thing, I think the most important thing about the Chekhov technique is that it frees you up, and frees you to use your imagination, which is the most creative thing that any human has, rather than use your memory. And I think that's why it's so important. It's immense freedom. There are many method actors that I've worked with who come to a workshop for the first time, and somewhere along, this happened to me. Somewhere along the line, one of them stopped and said, "Wait a minute, this is impossible." And I said, "Why?" He said, "It's too easy. The Chekhov technique." And I said, "Right, good. It's too easy because it's so natural." See, Chekhov created his technique in the same way that Freud created psychoanalysis. Freud psychoanalyzed himself first. Mm-hmm. That's how he learned. Chekhov simply analyzed what he was doing. He was a brilliant actor. So he analyzed what he was doing, gave it a name, and created exercises.
Okay. And what are the advantages of the Chekhov technique, in your opinion, compared to other methods? We talked about it, but is there anything else that you want to add to it?
I must admit I don't know much about the Meisner technique, but I think it's the same thing. There's something which is not addressing the imagination as your primary creative force. I may be wrong, because I don't know very much about the Meisner technique. I've tried to read his books a couple of times and failed. but it's okay. But I think that's the most important thing. It's the freedom you have to use your imagination without limits, and your imagination is unlimited. That's it.
Yeah. Why does an actor need a technique in the first place?
Talent is not enough. Talent is God-given, but it needs to be nurtured. It needs some kind of framework in order to develop. You know, you may be immensely talented. I'll give you an example without naming names. There was this young lady who acted in a production I did in India. She was 15 years old at the time. And I saw her not only in the production that I directed, but also in a number of other small productions that she did in this theater company, amateur theater company. Mm-hmm. And I was blown away by her. I said, she's an absolute natural. And I recommended that she go to the school in Singapore called ITI. She did. And she came back after a year. Tremendous talent, but she couldn't find the framework for it. So she couldn't do it. I'm very sorry about that because I sort of recommended that she goes there, but I'm telling you the basic idea is that talent is not enough. You have to have something that will nurture it, something that will give a framework. And also creativity without limits is anarchy. You can't be creative without any framework, without any frame of reference, without any limits. So technique gives you that framework. Within that, you can be as free as you like. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that I've seen, obviously, certainly in movies, I've seen a lot of brilliant method actors who, within the framework of that form of acting training, they create absolutely brilliant roles. So it's the technique that gives you the frame of reference within which you can be as free as you like.
And I'm going to be a bit harder with this question and ask you, what can you say for, to actors that says, listen, I don't need a technique. I didn't learn any technique. I'm just doing my technique, my thing, and I'm doing very well. I'm, they're maybe very, very successful. What can you say about it?
I think eventually, if an actor works enough, he learns. Most actors who reach that kind of, if they do very well, they learn from the people they play with. There's no question about the fact that eventually you develop a technique. Mm-hmm. I don't think it can last. I think if you don't have a technique and you don't have a frame of reference and you're not a learner, you can't get very far.
Yeah. Maybe you will repeat yourself, or because you don't have the tools to go and spread out.
Yeah. So it's I think eventually, if you're good and if you're talented and if you're a learner, you learn by doing, which is okay. It's fine. Let me take an example for myself. When I started acting in 1966, when I came back to Israel, I had absolutely no technique. But I got into the theater and I started acting, and I started learning. I was very fortunate because 3-4 years later, I met a woman named Jackie Kronberg who brought the concept of theater games to Israel, and I joined her company. So for 2 years, that was the first systematic technique that I ever learned. I studied improvisation technique with her. But when I went on stage for 4 years, 3.5 years before I met her, I acted. I was doing okay, but I don't think I could have gone anywhere if it hadn't been for those 2 years with Jackie.
What are your favorite tools on the technique, and why?
My favorite tools are centers, images, and the psychological gesture. Those are the three. This choice comes out of the fact that I came late to the Chekhov technique. I already had my own training technique, which was very much in the vein of the Chekhov work was all about the use of images, the use of imagination, and the connection between imagination and the body. So when I came, I started writing the book before I met Mala Powers. And then when I met her and I went to my first Chekhov conference, I stopped writing for 5 years because I realized I had to learn the Chekhov technique. So, but of the things that I learned that were parallel to what I had developed on my own, was about the centers, about the imagination, the use of images, and the psychological gesture. I actually used the psychological gesture without knowing too much about it except what Peter Fry taught us. In a number of productions, I asked actors to do something that I thought was the psychological gesture. And I learned years later that it was not, but it was.
Let me ask you, the centers, did you work with centers or some kind of a center before you went to the Chekhov technique?
No. Yes, of course.
Yeah?
Of course. In fact, I remember almost every year when the school year started, and we sat down to decide in the university what I'm going to be teaching. I said, I'm going to be teaching images.
Mm-hmm.
Dimuim. That's what I taught. I didn't have a name for it. At that time, I didn't call it ImageWork. I didn't make the connection to the Chekhov technique. I, in fact, discovered something very interesting. Years later, I actually had Chekhov's book to the actor.
Mm.
It's signed. I signed it in 1985. And I actually took a few exercises from there, and I still didn't make the connection. I thought it was, there were really interesting things there. So there are a few things that I borrowed.
Yeah.
But I didn't make the connection. So yes, I was using centers, not in the same Rudolf Steiner way of thinking, feeling, willing, but definitely the concept of having a center in a certain part of your body and using that to develop movement improvisation, for sure.
Yeah. And when you're working with centers, you're working with the Hara. You're mainly, this is for a working center.
Yes. It's of the three Steiner categories, it's the willing center, it's the low center, and that's when I'm training actors, I work with that. I usually do some kind of exercises showing them the difference between energy coming from the head, the chest, or the abdomen. I do these exercises so they know the difference. But I say when I start working, it's the will center. I think it has to be.
Yeah.
Because it's not about feeling. When I taught at the university, I used to teach for 2 years. That was my condition. I taught for 2 years. I took a class, and I taught them for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, I did a production with them. And 1 year, we sat down towards the end of the year, and one of my actors said something about, but when we're acting, and I said, but you're not acting. What? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you haven't done a single exercise this year, whole year, in transformation. You've done a lot of exercises. You've learned a lot about your creative being and your ability to express yourself and your physical expression, but you haven't acted in the sense of transformation. And in Chekhov's tapes, that's the first thing he talks about. In the lesson, that's the first thing he talks about. Transformation. Yes, that's the basis for creating a character. And I know some of my colleagues in the Chekhov work have a problem with this, but I regard my training as pre-Chekhov, preparing the actor's instrument to use the Chekhov technique most effectively. Joanna frequently told me there's no such thing as pre-Chekhov. Everything is Chekhov. That's okay. We agree to disagree.
Yeah, but from my point of view, and that I did just, I worked with you for some time, and I can honestly, understand what you're saying about the pre-Chekhov. Yeah. I mean, it's a blend. It's also pre-Chekhov, and it's also Chekhov, and also post-Chekhov. I mean, it's a very mixed, very interesting work.
Yeah.
And And now when I'm coming back to your book, so it's even more clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. What is your dream regarding to the technique and its future?
I saw the question when you sent it to us. I don't have a dream for it. I'll tell you why. I just have a dream that it'll go on and on. When MICHA first started, or even before that, before I was involved, the Chekhov technique had sort of disappeared underground. After the New York studio, Beatrice Strait's studio closed, Chekhov technique disappeared. There were individuals who taught it. Joanna taught it. Lisa taught it. Leonard taught. Leonard, by the way, he told me he was teaching at Rutgers University, and he said he used to teach Chekhov underground because it wasn't recognized, and nobody thought. And so he had to, if he wanted to use the Chekhov technique or teach it, he couldn't do it in a formal class, or else he did it but hid it somehow. So that was in the 90s.
Wow.
But since then, the Chekhov technique has grown immensely. First with MICHA, and probably in a way globally, much more so through Michael Chekhov Europe, because the two organizations work differently. MICHA tried working in Europe a number of years. They were in Amsterdam once, and there were one other place, I think, but they went back to the United States, and they decided that anybody who wants to study with them has to come to the United States. Michael Chekhov Europe, because it was established by one person from Denmark, one person from Croatia, and one from Germany, they set up a format where the teachers would go to wherever they could. And anybody who might be following Uli Meyer-Hosch's on any given year, he goes everywhere. He brings Chekhov to the whole world.
Yeah.
So recently he opened up Albania. And I've been doing it in India. Both of us were in Taiwan, not together, but at different times. In Singapore, we worked together in Singapore. So in a way, Michael Chekhov Europe has a much wider global reach. I know that of the MICHA teachers, Leonard works a lot abroad. He's worked in many, many different places, in Finland and Rome, and lots of places, in China. But in terms of the organization, what does MICHA do? It does workshops in the United States. Anybody who wants to study with the MICHA teachers has to come to the United States. Mm-hmm. MC, it's a completely different concept. Yeah,
I once told Uli that he needs to stand in the place and someone needs to spin the globe beneath his feet, and he'll just do stop and he will teach.
Yeah, true.
Amazing.
It's true. So in that sense, these two organizations are very different, but the main thing is that the Chekhov technique has grown tremendously. And in the beginning, there were one or two books that were written about Chekhov, mostly about Chekhov, about the history of MICHA or whatever it is. Now, Cynthia Ashberger wrote a book. It's a long title, which I don't remember right now, but she wrote a book which is about how the technique is done now. This was a few years ago. But the idea is that it's developing. We are all learning. We're all developing. And we're going from wherever it was in the 90s, it's gone forward. People teach it in different ways. I mean, I remember Ted once watched a workshop that I gave at one of the MICHA conferences on the imaginary body. And he said, wow, I've never seen it taught like that. And he said, that's amazing. This is something new. So we all develop as a result of that, the Chekhov technique. That's the dream. The dream has actually come true.
That's what I want to ask you. So from your point of view, this is the dream. I mean,
yeah, we are living the dream. The beginning of the Chekhov of the MICHA, of the Michael Chekhov Association, was in 1995 in Berlin. We decided then to set up an international organization of some kind. It took 4 years to actually become an official organization, but 1995. Then it was a dream.
Yeah.
And the first years of MICHA extremely difficult. We had a lot of difficulties getting students. But now that we are living the dream, Chekhov has come alive.
Yeah. Okay. And you have, it's a bit of a tricky question, but I don't know.
Okay.
If you have 1 minute to convince someone that completed a drama school to start learning the Chekhov technique, what will you say?
I would go back to this concept of imagination, the connection between the body and the imagination. People who have never learned Chekhov or never learned anything, I mean, my training is not unique. I mean, it's unique because I wrote it and it has this particular impact. But there are many other practitioners who do similar things. But if this actor has only done method acting or versions of Stanislavski, that's what happens mostly in Eastern Europe, go free up your imagination. That's the most important thing, because any technique that is only text-based or autobiographically based, regardless of what you call it, it's limited. And the only way to grow is to develop your imagination and develop your ability for physical expression. Because in the Chekhov work, you don't play the character. You play the image of the character that you see. This is the whole idea of the imaginary body. You imagine what the character looks like. And your journey is from where you are, in this body, where you are, to that body. The imaginary creation that you want to create. And that's, you have to know how to access your imagination and translate it into physical terms. And B, you have to develop your ability for physical expression. And it's all about transformation. I mean, you look at the photographs of Chekhov, all the parts that he played. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because years ago I came across a book devoted to my favorite actor, Laurence Olivier. And you turn the pages, you see all the parts that he's played, and it's unbelievable, the transformation. Unbelievable. I saw him, I was lucky enough to see him in 1964.
Wow. In
the production of Othello that he did. He came on stage, you couldn't recognize him. Just simply could not recognize him. And my image of him was the thin, spindly little Richard III.
Yeah.
He came on enormous, with huge.
He was short, actually. In reality, he was short.
Yeah. I told you the story about the fact, I think, that when I was in Manchester, the National Theatre used to come all the time. They came to Manchester to do previews. And so for 2 or 3 years, we saw every National Theatre production. And I was determined at one time I was going to go and get an autograph.
Hmm.
So I waited at the stage door. And I waited and I waited and I waited. And then finally, one of the actresses coming out, and I said, "Excuse me, is Sir Lawrence, is he coming?" He said, "He's left." And when I reconstructed what happened, I was looking for a giant. I was standing there looking like this. He passed by here. So I never got the autograph. He was 5'6", 5'7", like 1.60 meters something.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
For Othello, I think he wrote, because he's my favorite also, and he wrote that he went to a deer, or I don't know, and he yelled he wanted to get his pitch an octave down.
He did.
It's amazing.
He did. Not only that, but he lifted weights. So when he came on stage, he had muscles like huge biceps. And he came on, the first few words that he said on stage, could hardly understand them. They were such a bass baritone. It was unbelievable what he did with his voice.
This passion for transformation is amazing. It's amazing.
Anyway, that's the thing. It's about the imagination, which is transformative, and this concept of Chekhov's concept about the actor's journey is from here to the image. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply brilliant, because that involves transformation. You can't be yourself. You have to change. You have to change your body. You have to change your voice. You have to change everything.
And my next question is, what beauty do you see in being a teacher?
I love learning from my actors. When I see them doing something. There was one exercise in my book that there was a student who did this exercise. It was a abstract improvisation, and she worked for about 25-30 minutes without stopping. And then and she, every time she made a shift of direction, of pace, of tempo, anytime she made a choice, like an improvisational choice, I kept saying, yes, yes, yes. And then when she was finished, I asked her, because what we were seeing, I was sure, was an absolutely pure, unending act of creation. And I never saw anything like it until then, and not afterwards either. Not really. Because this is a pure abstract. And I asked her, what do you remember? She says, nothing, except that I couldn't make a mistake. So every time she changed, and I said yes, it was because she changed something and she knew it was right. And it's only if you know what an abstract improvisation is like that you can appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Because there's no narrative. There's energy. There's changes of energy and movement and forms of movement and forms of expression. And she just did everything right in an abstract improvisation. There's no text. So I usually when I finish teaching either a workshop or a class, I say what I told you. I use that saying from the Talmud that I learned from all who taught me. Mikol melamdai iskalti. And so I love teaching. I love being able to get students to the point where they can do something like that young woman did. I don't know if you know Orit Peleg.
Nope.
No, she was the actress. Mm-hmm. But that's my greatest pleasure. And when things like that happen, or when things like what happened to that young woman in the Dibuk, when I started working with her, she had absolutely no movement training. She could not move. She could not express herself physically. Her teachers told her that she wouldn't get anywhere because she has a problem with her voice. Now, you saw the production.
Oh, wow. She was amazing.
The range of her voice and her vocal possibilities and her vocal expression, her physical expression, endless. So that's a great pleasure. That's beauty incarnate.
Yeah, she didn't go to cliches. You can easily go to a cliche there. Very, and in the video you can see that it's very authentic. She's going through something.
In that production, I only worked with her and with the young man who played Hanan. Mm-hmm. I didn't train the whole company, just the two of them, and they were both brilliant. So that's the beauty. The beauty is creating together with an actor a work of art.
And did you had bad times as a Chekhov teacher, and what did you do to improve your situation?
I don't remember ever having a bad time.
Hard times in getting a job, doing a work, I don't know.
In that sense, I've been very lucky. I was working at the university. I had that wonderful thing called tenure. So I was the head of the acting and directing program for many years. So I created the program. So I I don't remember, I don't recall ever having any questions asked about the Chekhov technique. The only time I think, come to think of it, before 1994, before I met Mala Powers, I went to a workshop in France, and it was called Beyond Stanislavski. And there was a young man who taught Laban. There was this amazing movement teacher from Russia, Andrei Drajnin, who I think he died. Amazing. He was a top sort of movement expert in Russia. And there was somebody from the Odin Theater, from Eugenio Barber's theater, Tony Kotz. And they gave workshops. And this was indeed beyond Stanislavski. There were nowhere near Stanislavski. But there was a possibility of offering an open workshop. So I decided I'm going to do it. And I tried to teach my concept of using images. And I'm not quite sure why, but it failed miserably. People did, they came, some people got up and did the work and so on, but it was, didn't work. And that's not, strictly speaking, Chekhov work, but it was a very important lesson for me about what I'm teaching and how I'm teaching it. So it was.
Wasn't you weren't ready? What was it?
This was a conference of a lot of very, very fine professionals, and the technique, the training that I had been working on, wasn't there yet. So I sort of went all over the place instead of creating a clear concept. I think that's it. I don't know. I think somebody recorded it, videotaped it, and I have the videotape, but I've never watched it.
Oh wow!
No.
Oh wow!
It was hard. It was very tough going, and it didn't work. But that's the only time that I remember.
But maybe if you watch it, you can see. I don't know. You can find a real reason.
No, it wasn't clear. It wasn't. I was very nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Even though this is in the 80s, I'd been teaching for a good number of years, but I was very nervous because of the audience. There were really some really top professionals there from all over the world. Very, very fine actors, directors. And here was little me trying to show what I know, and it didn't work. That's okay. It was a good lesson.
Interesting. Use 1, 2, or 3 words. Acting is?
Imagination, attention, precision.
Yes. And now you can answer in a lot of ways to a lot of programs, but the question is, tell me about your program of teaching. What's the platform options? I mean, you can do MC, you can do ImageWork. Just choose one. I think ImageWork is very interesting.
The thing about ImageWork is that, and that's the reason I wrote the book, because after having taught for many, many years, I had over one weekend, I was supposed to give a workshop in Bratislava for some theater festival, and over the weekend, just before the conference began, the theater festival began, I was going to give a workshop there, and I sort of said to myself, okay, I'm not going to teach anything that I've ever taught before. I have actors here from all over the world. Over the weekend, I threw away about 75% of all the exercises that I'd been doing, and I found the technique. I cleared away the rubbish. So the ImageWork, the one thing that I'm very proud of is that it's extremely clearly structured. So, I know that, and I know that's the strength of the training. So this is, this is the program. And what I told you was that I used to teach 2 years. That would be the ideal format for me.
Yeah.
1 year of training, second year Chekhov, ending with a production.
And it starts with in a few words. the image work starts with and goes and...
It starts with purely physical work.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it starts. And it starts with the concept of the center, and just the idea of working with an image in the center, in the working center, and seeing how it affects your movement, learning how an image can affect your movement and can affect your expression, and it develops from there into some complex. There's one thing that I don't do in a short workshop. I don't work on voice. The book is called Body, Voice, Imagination, and there are exercises there on voice, but in a short workshop, I never do them. It's too long. It's a very long process. Connecting the imagination to the body and to the voice. It's a long process that you cannot do in a 5 or even a 10-day workshop. You can't do it. That's the only element that I don't do in short workshops. But if I teach longer, I've taught in Singapore twice, once for 2 months and once very intense 3 weeks, which was the equivalent of 2 months because I taught every day. Yeah. And there we went through the whole series of the exercises, the whole training, including the voice.
Tell me about a student of yours. I think you told, but maybe you have another one. A student of yours that you remember very well that touched you for some reason.
I have to go back to the Dvid book.
Okay.
She was a professional actress. She had finished acting school, and she had already acted in small parts in a couple of plays. But I gave her the training, complete training. A lot of it, not all of it. Mm-hmm. And she's the best actress I've ever worked with, without a doubt. There are a lot of other actors who I worked with and I really enjoyed working with them. I taught for nearly 30 years, television universities, a few hundred actors who I taught. And I remember a few of them, but in terms of the best, she was the best.
And maybe not in terms of the best, maybe some student that you thought would never get it, but was it something like this?
Yeah, of course. I have it's sort of a bittersweet story. There was an actress who studied, and every year we had these endless discussions whether we should let her go on to the next year. And finally, she got to the 4th year. Mm-hmm. And I was the head of the acting program, and whenever a class was finished at the end of the year, I used to meet all the actors and talk to them. And I talked to this young woman, and I said, listen, you've finished the program. I don't think you will ever work. I have to be frank about this. Every year was a real question whether you should continue. I don't think you have it. 10 years later, she did a one-woman show about her mother, who was a very famous singer in Egypt, and it was brilliant. So I went backstage, and I said, after introducing myself once again, I said, do you remember our conversation when you left the school? She said, I'll never forget it in my entire life. Wow. I said, well, I take it back. This was brilliant. However, I was not altogether wrong. She never did anything like that. She got the personal story with a one-woman show, which was nothing less than brilliant. But since then, nothing. So I wasn't altogether wrong. I'm not proud of it, but you're asking about if there's somebody I was wrong about. There are 1 or 2 people I remember clearly. There was this young woman who, again, I don't want to mention names, of a young woman who was the star of the department for 4 years. Everything she did, she was it. And she was really good. Wonderful. Went out into the real world and disappeared. Disappeared.
Well, it happens.
Yeah. So, you know, we've produced a lot of really, really good people. The department, I mean, really good people. And we made some mistakes. I always used to, when we discuss that in any professional level, we would always say that we make about 10% mistakes in judgment in any given class. 10% you make a mistake in judgment either way. You know, either think that they're brilliant and they're going to have a huge career, or we think they're terrible and they do have a huge career.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a precise science, but it's something I learned over the years.
Yeah. Well, you're getting better at recognizing, but you can't really know. Yeah. And we are in our last question. So, is the technique helping you in your everyday life? And if so, can you give examples?
I think, again, since I came to the technique fully developed, as it were, I had my own training, which was very clear as a system. It's all based on this concept of using the imagination. In my directing, when I create adaptations, which is what I do, it's all about the use of imagination. I imagine the whole play as I'm developing the adaptation. So it's not necessarily the technique. It's a major strand of the technique, the use of the imagination. But the only way, for example, that I can create an adaptation, I've created adaptations of Macbeth, of Blood Wedding, of also all sorts of other plays, and it's all based on Hedda Gabler. When I do that, I'm actually sitting here in my study and imagining every single scene. That's how I write it, and that's what comes to my imagination. So that's how I create these adaptations. And then when I read them, or I see the production in video years later, I have absolutely no idea how I got there. I know the process. The process is using imagination. So it's not specifically the Chekhov technique, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I taught a directing course in MICHA 2 years ago, and I told the actors, I don't know nobody really knows what Chekhov's directing technique was. I wrote a long article I researched it, trying to find out what kind of a director he was. And the conclusion I came to was he was a very conceptual director in terms of the way he used the stage and the sets and whatever it is. But nobody really knows. So I told the students there, the participants then, that the only way I can teach Chekhov directing in a Chekhov way is teaching them how I direct. And they made the connections. At the end of it was 5 days, very intense, 6 days, very intense. But at the end of it, they made the connection. They said, yes, clearly this is in the Chekhov vein. This is the way the Chekhov technique would work or should work in directing.
Are you planning to do it again, the directing course?
I recently did, for the 6th time, my production of Blood Wedding, which is a very radical adaptation. But this was a dream come true because it was, I had done it in Hebrew twice. I'd done it in Danish. I did it in French, in English. And my dream was to do it in Spanish. So I did. This was in Spain, in Spanish. And that was in November. Right now, I have nothing planned.
And but you want to teach again the course that you did in MICHA for directors?
I would love to, of course. But what I'm doing now is I'm actually, as a result of that course, 2 years ago, I've started writing a book on directing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So it's okay if I don't teach it because I'm going to be writing it.
And can you tell me something about it?
It's listen. I taught directing at Tel Aviv University, both undergraduate and graduate, and I mentored many student productions. So what I'm doing is writing about that process, the way I taught directing.
Okay, let's hope it will be out soon.
Oh no, it's gonna take about a year to finish, at least. But it's that's where it's going now.
So, David Zinder, I want to say thank you, a great thank you, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Ofir.
We can go on for hours. I can hear stories. You know me.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and I hope we'll continue to collaborate.
Yeah.